So the book of Ecclesiastes has confused a lot of believers over the ages. Some people get to that book and in their Bible reading plan, and they're like, oh boy, 12 straight days of not understanding my Bible readings, because it's a hard book to understand. Yesterday, we started a sermon series on it, and today, what I'm doing is making a few introductory videos for you to help you understand it. What I want to do in this video is give you a framework of the whole message of the book so that then you can use that framework when you're reading a piece of the book and something confusing comes up. So essentially, if you're reading and you're like, wait, this isn't adding up, here's what to do. Consider the big message of the book. Here's the big message. I'll give it to you by looking at 3 texts. If you want to grab a Bible, you can do that. First, the preacher kind of introduces what he is doing in his 12 chapter long sermon in chapter 1, verse 12 through verse 15. There's 4 verses there where he's like, here's what I'm doing. And basically what he's doing is going on a quest to solve the great mysteries of the world and basically see if he can solve the big problems of the world. He limits himself, though, he says in other places, to only looking at the revealed world. So he's not considering God, he's not asking God for answers, he's looking at the world. He's out searching for wisdom and answers. And what he concludes is that that is a fruitless, vain, frustrating, vexing endeavor. He says, you cannot make straight what has been made crooked, what is lacking cannot be counted. So basically, he starts off by saying, if anybody could figure the world out by looking at the world, it's me, King Solomon, got all the resources in the world, wisest man who ever lived. If anybody can do it, it's me, right? But it can't be done. So you might cast the problem of the book as you and I can't figure the world out or fix the world's problems. There's a key sentence. You and I can't figure the world out and can't solve the world's problems. Maybe another way to say it is that the answers to the biggest questions about life in the world are not written in Life in the World. So we have to look somewhere else. Then he spends 12 chapters, almost all of the 12 chapters, just giving examples of confusing contradictions in the world, the things that should not be that are. And that's why the book confuses so many people, because he just says things that we're like, I know that's true, but am I allowed to believe that? Or I know this is true, and I know this is true, but aren't those two things contradictory? So let me give you some examples. At one point in Ecclesiastes, you will read that money answers all objections. And that's kind of true. Like, if you don't have enough money, I bet you feel like money would solve your problems. And at another point, he basically says, more money, more problems. That was not invented by 90s hip hop artists. No, more money, more problems, he says. So those are both true, but they're contradictory, right? One of those should not be true, but they both are. And so there's a vexing contradiction in life, and you're not going to make straight what has been made crooked. What's lacking, you're not going to be able to count. Like, you're not going to figure that one out. Or in another place, he says that living righteously pays off. Like, the one who fears God and does righteously, God blesses that person. They wind up having a better life. You know, what goes around comes around. And that's true. But also, good, righteous people have accidents and die young, and the wicked prosper. That's true too, isn't it? And those are contradictory, but they're both true. Boy, that's a real head scratcher, isn't it? But his point of the whole book is you're not going to make straight what God made crooked. It's all a vapor. It's all confusing. It's all a mystery, and you're not going to figure out the answer to that. He just gives example after example after example of that for almost all of his 12 chapters. So that means when you come across something confusing and contradictory and you're like, I feel like there's not an answer to this, that's his point. You're not doing it wrong if you're kind of confused by some of the messages. His point is that what is crooked can't be made straight, and what is lacking can't be counted. So what should we do? Well, he tells us just twice. He spends almost all the 12 chapters asking the question, building the tension. And in two places, he gives us the answer. What do you do? Well, the answer is first in chapter 5, the first 4 verses, and then in chapter 12, verses either 13 and 14 or 12 and 13. I'm doing this without the text in front of me. He says in chapter 5, guard your steps when you go into the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. God's in heaven, you're on earth. Let your words be few. And he says at the end in chapter 12, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commands, for this is the whole duty of man. So, lots of mysteries in the world you can't figure out. Lots of stuff here that shouldn't be here. The world is crooked and broken, and it's just a strange place where there's stuff that's maddening and should not be. What do you do with that? Do you rail your fist up at God in pride and anger? Do you judge God in pride? No, he says. What that should do is humble you. It should make you say, I can't figure the world out, and I can't fix the world. And so I will go to God in humility and reverence, and I will listen to him. Guard your steps when you go in the house of God. Draw near to listen. It's better to offer than the sacrifice of a fool. Keep your words few before God. He's in heaven and you're on earth. Fear God. Keep his commands. So the fact that life is confusing and tough to figure out should move you to humility and reverence before God. If you go to him and listen, he will teach you answers. So what we're going to do when we go through this book, and we started yesterday, is first look at the tension the author is creating in a certain passage, the contradiction, the thing that shouldn't be, whatever it is. Then we'll go to God in humility and reverence, and we will ask him. And then we'll search the other 65 books for an answer to that problem. Many times, God gives it. So there's a framework for Ecclesiastes. When you are confused, remember that that is the point. Let it bring you before God in humility and reverence to ask him, and then ask whether these things are addressed in the other 65 books of the Bible.